The TV hummed quietly, casting flickering shadows around the living room. The screen's intermittent glow seemed to dance on the walls, creating ghostly shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Rain lashed against the windows, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the glass. The sound was mesmerizing, almost like a somber melody accompanying the storm outside. The storm had arrived earlier than expected, a raging beast eager to unleash its fury. Lightning illuminated the sky, followed by thunder that shook the house. Curled up on the sofa, I absent-mindedly stroked Mittens, my ginger cat. He was my constant companion, especially on nights like this. He was unusually agitated tonight, his fur bristling, a low growl rumbling in his chest. It was as if he sensed something I couldn't. His emerald eyes, usually filled with feline indifference, darted nervously towards the front door. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow more menacing. "It's just the storm, Mittens," I murmured, trying to soothe him, but his unease only mirrored my own growing apprehension. I knew something was wrong. My husband, Mark, was late. He was never late, especially not on stormy nights. He had promised to be home before the storm hit. The road seemed deserted, a desolate scene under the pouring rain. I glanced at the clock again. Almost midnight. Every passing second intensified my anxiety. A knot of worry tightened in my stomach. The feeling that something terrible was about to happen was inescapable. Mark was always punctual, dependable. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the air, in the way the storm seemed to mirror my own unease. The wind howled like a banshee, its mournful cries weaving between the crashes of thunder. The storm seemed to have a life of its own, each flash of lightning illuminating the night like a camera flash, revealing dancing shadows and indistinct shapes. The power flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness before surging back to life with a bang. The lights buzzed erratically, as if struggling against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. Mittens leaped from my lap, hissing, his back arched, eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He seemed to sense something I couldn't see, something lurking in the shadows. A sudden thump from upstairs sent a shiver down my spine. The sound was deep and resonant, as if something heavy had fallen. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. Each beat seemed to echo in the silent room, amplifying my fear. It was probably just a loose shutter banging in the wind, I thought, trying to quell the rising tide of fear. But the storm outside seemed to conspire against me, each gust of wind bringing new and unsettling sounds. Another bang, louder this time, followed by a dragging sound. My blood ran cold. The sound was unmistakable, as if something or someone was moving slowly through the house. Someone was inside the house. The presence was palpable, a shadow moving with intent. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, its cold metal strangely comforting in my trembling hand. It was the only thing that gave me a sense of security in that moment of absolute terror. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind, made my pulse quicken. I crept towards the stairs, each step heavy with dread. The dragging sound came again, closer now, from the direction of our bedroom. Peeking around the corner, my breath caught in my throat. The bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the darkness. A long, distorted shadow stretched across the floor, writhing like a living thing. Panic surged through me, threatening to overwhelm me. I thought of Mark, his easy smile, his infectious laugh. I had to be strong for him. Gripping the poker tighter, I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The room was in disarray. Clothes were scattered across the floor. The vanity mirror was shattered, shards of glass glinting menacingly in the dim light. And then I saw him. A dark figure, tall and imposing, was silhouetted against the window, his back to me. Relief flooded me, so intense it left me weak. It was Mark. Mark? My voice was a choked whisper, thick with unshed tears. The figure didn't turn. Mark! Is that you? What happened? You scared me to death. The figure remained motionless, shrouded in an eerie silence. Unease pricked at me once more. Why wasn't he answering? Taking a hesitant step forward, I reached out a trembling hand and touched his shoulder. He was cold, deathly cold. A scream rose in my throat, but before I could unleash it, the figure turned. My blood ran cold. The face that stared back at me was a grotesque mockery of the man I loved. His skin was ashen gray, his eyes vacant and staring, his lips pulled back in a horrifying grin. He lunged at me, a guttural snarl escaping his throat. I stumbled back, raising the poker just in time to deflect his attack. The impact vibrated up my arm, sending a jolt of pain through me. He came at me again, relentless, driven by some insatiable hunger. Fear lent me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I dodged, I weaved, I fought with every fiber of my being. The room became a blur of motion and sound, the air thick with the smell of decay, and something else, something alien and utterly terrifying. The poker connected with his shoulder, but it was like hitting a brick wall. He didn't even flinch. He grabbed my wrist, his grip like a vice. His eyes, those empty, soulless eyes, seemed to bore into me, sucking the life out of me. I struggled, I kicked, I screamed until my throat was raw. As his face got closer, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that gave me pause for a split second, a spark of recognition, of pain. He hesitated, his grip slackening for just a fraction of a second. It was all the time I needed. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I brought my knee up hard into his groin. He roared in pain, releasing me. I scrambled back, putting as much distance between us as possible. He doubled over, clutching his stomach, the agony evident on his face, a low moan escaping his lips. The monstrous facade seemed to crack, revealing a glimpse of the man I knew beneath, a man who looked lost and vulnerable. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with confusion, with fear. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice a tortured whisper. "What's happening? Why am I—" He trailed off, his gaze falling to his hands. They were covered in dirt, in scratches, in something that looked disturbingly like blood. He stared at them in horror, his face a mask of disbelief. "Sarah," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I don't understand. I think I need help." He took a step towards me, his hand outstretched. I flinched back, my heart torn between hope and terror. Could this really be Mark? Or was this some cruel trick? He stopped, his hand falling to his side, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Don't come any closer," he said, his voice thick with despair. "I don't know what's wrong with me, but I don't want to hurt you." He backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm going," he whispered. "I'll find a way to fix this, I promise." And then, before I could say a word, he turned and stumbled out of the room, disappearing into the storm-tossed night. I stood there for a long moment, my body trembling with exhaustion, my mind reeling. What had just happened? Had that really been Mark? And if so, what had become of him? By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and bright in the morning sunlight. Nature seemed to have renewed itself, but inside me, the storm still raged. The events of the previous night seemed like a nightmare, a blur of fear and confusion, a figment of my overactive imagination. But the shattered mirror, its shards reflecting the light in an eerie way, the claw marks on the floor, deep and undeniable, the lingering smell of decay clinging to the air, all served as chilling reminders that what I had experienced was all too real. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage for horror. And then there was the phone call, that shrill sound cutting through the silence, the one that confirmed my worst fears. The voice on the other end was heavy with grief. Mark's body had been found in the woods, miles from home. The news was a devastating blow. He had been missing for days, and we had all feared the worst. They said it was a hiking accident. The search had been extensive. They said it was a miracle he survived the fall, but the exposure had been too much. The cold, the loneliness of the wilderness had been relentless. He had died peacefully in his sleep, or so they said. But I knew the truth. Mark was dead. He had been dead for days, and there had been no peace in his passing. He had been dead for days. The pain of his loss was unbearable. And whatever had come back to me that night, whatever had worn his face and spoken with his voice, it was still out there. The presence was palpable, a constant shadow. Watching, waiting. I could feel its eyes on me, even when I couldn't see it. And I was afraid. The fear was a constant companion, a shadow that wouldn't leave.